Anyone got a solution that they want to share? Just feel free to copy and paste your code in the chat. Take a look. Okay. Okay, I'll take Zoe's response. I like that. There's just one little thing that I would tweak, but yeah, let's take a look. So this is Zoe's response. So you had the user input their birth year, so that's good. And then you converted that to an integer. I like that because remember the input is by default a string. And then you subtracted their birth year from 2025, which is the current year, to calculate their age. That's perfect. And then over here, all I would change is these commas to a plus sign because we have to concatenate. But remember, since age is an integer, we will have to turn that into a string before we combine them with other strings. And then we print that out. So let's test it out. So I was born in 2009, and it tells me that I'm 16 years old. I'd also just add a space here just for clear formatting, but other than that, we're all good. Yeah, nice job, Zoe. Thank you for your response. Any questions on the homework? Feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat. Any questions you guys have? If there are no questions regarding the homework, let's move on then. So yeah, again, this is one solution. This is almost identical to Zoe's. So great job, guys. Yeah, now let's talk about USACO. So USACO stands for USA Computing Olympiad. It's focused on the US, but multiple countries around the world can participate and do. And in fact, if you do well enough, you can qualify for the International Olympiad in Informatics, or the IOI. Or if you identify as female, you can also qualify for the EGOI, which is like an exclusively female version of the IOI, basically. And those are both international. And USACO is open to students of all ages, but most participants are in high school or at least late middle school. If you're younger, you can participate, as well as if you're older. But yeah, most participants are within this age range. And USACO is individual, so you don't need a team to do it. And all of the problems are very algorithmic, so it's like problem solution. It's not anything that you have to design, like a lot of hackathons. So that's something that makes USACO unique. And the best part about USACO is that it's completely free. All you have to do is make an account, which I will show you on the next slide. Let me see if anyone, okay. Yeah. So to create a USACO account, just use this link over here. It'll take you to the USACO site, and you just have to fill in some of your information. And as you can see in the corner, there's also a lot of resources and some frequently asked questions that they give you information about, which we will also go over. So yeah, I highly encourage you guys to make a USACO account in your own time. Just use this link that would be in the slides that are posted in the document. So yeah, you can feel free to do that in your own time. And so you guys might be wondering, what are the benefits in doing USACO? So obviously, if you're interested in CS, or even if you're just thinking about it, USACO is just a really good way to explore your interests and develop a lot of skills as well. And especially when you go up the divisions in USACO, a lot of the stuff that you will be doing is stuff that you will have to learn in college and use in the workplace. So you're really just being able to get ahead doing USACO. And USACO is a pretty rigorous competition, so it's looked upon very favorably by a lot of institutions. So it could definitely boost your profile as a student. So whether that's for college apps or even like applying for a job in the future, it's looked upon very highly. And you can develop a lot of skills that you would have to use in the workplace, especially if you want to go into like a CS related career. And as you can see, USACO has all these sponsors, and all these companies sponsor USACO because a lot of the skills that USACO helps develop are what they are looking for in their employees. So it just goes to show how important USACO is for developing these skills. So yeah, I encourage you guys to check out USACO. Definitely something that you guys want to be participating in. So are there any questions so far at this point about anything I just went over? Check. You have questions, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself. Okay, so if there are no questions, let's move on. So how does USACO work? Let's talk about that. So let's go over some basic USACO structure first. There are 4 contests within a year or like within a season, and 3 of them are in the winter, so December, January, and February. And there would usually be like a window that opens on a Friday and closes on sometime that following Sunday. And then anytime within the window, you can just log into USACO. You can just do that from home. You don't have to go to any like testing site or anything. So you log into USACO from home, and then once you start the contest, you will be given 4 hours to complete 3 problems. And then there will also be one special contest in March known as the US Open, and it's usually the most difficult contest of the year. So you get 5 hours to complete 3 problems. And this one kind of just closes off the season, basically. And so what does a problem consist of? So you are usually given like a problem statement, which is basically the context within which you have to solve the problem. And then after introducing the context, you are given some kind of issue, usually regarding Farmer John and some of his cows, usually a cow called Bessie. So you have to help Farmer John solve some problem. And then they will also give you some sample inputs and outputs just to show you what your code is supposed to do. So for example, if we take a look at this problem, Cow College. So Farmer John is planning to open a new university for cows. So that's kind of like the problem statement. And then it says that there are N cows and N is guaranteed to be at least 1 and no greater than 100,000. So there are N cows who can potentially attend this university. Each cow is willing to pay a maximum tuition of CI. So each maximum tuition that they're willing to pay is guaranteed to be at least 1 and no more than 1 million. Farmer John can set the tuition that all cows must pay to enroll. If this tuition is greater than the maximum a cow is willing to pay, then the cow will not attend the university. And Farmer John wants to make the most money possible so he can pay his instructors a fair wage. So again, that's just kind of filler. Please determine how much money he can make and how much tuition he should charge. So they tell you the input format. So the first line contains N. So remember that represents the number of cows. And then the second line contains N integers, so C1, C2, all the way to Cn, where each C represents the maximum tuition each cow is willing to pay. So like C1 is the maximum tuition cow 1 is willing to pay, and C2 is the max that cow 2 is willing to pay, and so on. And then your output format would be the maximum amount of money Farmer John can make and how much he should charge to make that money. And then if there are multiple solutions, you should output the solution with the smallest optimal tuition. So for example, this is the sample input that they give you. So who can tell me what the 4 represents, what this 4 up here represents? Just you can feel free to unmute and share your ideas. What do you guys think the 4? Amount of numbers? Yeah. That's just, the amount of numbers or the amount of cows basically that you're dealing with. And then, so we see 4 numbers down here, exactly. So what do you guys think the 1, 6, 4, and 6 represent? Feel free to take a guess. Don't be afraid to be wrong. The 1, 6, 4, 6. Yeah, the amount of cows. A little bit, kind of. Yeah, that's close. So the 4 actually tells us like the amount of cows that we have. And then the 1 actually just means that the first cow is willing to pay like $1 to enroll in this university. And then the 6 tells us that the second cow is willing to pay $6. The 4 tells us that the third cow is willing to pay $4. And then the fourth number tells us that the fourth cow is willing to pay $6 to enroll in this university. So yeah, and now we know that if Farmer John, for example, if he charges like $2, then the first cow is not willing to pay that much. So the first cow would not enroll. And then the other cows would all pay $2 each. So he would earn $6. So we can see here that the optimal amount of money he should charge is $4, because if he charges $4, this one here, this cow here won't be able to participate, but all 3 of these cows would be able to participate, and he would earn 3 times 4, which is $12. Does that kind of make sense? Are there any questions regarding this USACO problem? Okay, so if there aren't any questions, let's talk about how the scoring works. So every USACO contest is worth a total of 1,000 points, and they're evenly split among the 3 problems. So each problem is worth approximately 333 points. And then each problem has multiple test cases, usually around 10. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar with the terminology, a test case is basically like a unique input that you should produce a unique output for. And they're basically just like different scenarios to test your code on. And let me just check the chat real quick if there are any questions. Do all of these problems use Java? Good question. So you can actually use a couple different programming languages. You can use Python, Java, or C++, so whichever one you choose. And we'll actually be talking more about like which language you should use in a few minutes. So hold tight to that question. How old do you have to be to sign up? There is no age limit, so any age can sign up. So yeah, good question. Good questions, guys. So yeah, so back to the scoring. So like I said, there's usually around 10 test cases, and each test case is worth the same number of points. So if there are 333 points per question, and a question has 10 test cases, then it would be 33.33 points per case. And then if there's like 15 test cases, it would be 22.22 points per case, and so on. You can just do the division by yourself. And then you really want to maximize your points. So sometimes if your solution only works for some of the test cases, but not all of them, you should still submit that solution because it's way better than leaving it blank. Because for example, if you can solve half the test cases, you get half the points for that question. So yeah, partial credit is offered, and that is definitely a way you can maximize your points. And then, so for divisions, USACO has 4 divisions, right? It has bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. So everyone starts off at bronze once they make an account. And then if you do well enough in the bronze contest, meaning you score above the cutoff, you get promoted to silver. And you don't have to score perfect to get promoted. Usually the cutoff is around 800, or sometimes it can go as low as like 700-ish. So all you have to do is get like 700 to 800 out of 1,000 points to get promoted to the next division. And a special thing that USACO has is this thing called an in-contest promotion, or an ICP, where if you do score a perfect, you can get promoted to the next division immediately, so you don't have to wait until they announce the cutoffs after the contest is over. And then the advantage about that is that you can then take the contest of the next division within the same weekend. So you don't have to wait until the next contest to participate in the next division's contest. And as you can see from this graph, most people are in the bronze division, around 70%, and then there are some people in silver, and then the drop starts to happen at gold, and then platinum is like super rare. And then, yeah, are there any questions regarding the divisions or the scoring? Just check the chat. Does the cutoff always change? Good question. So yeah, the cutoff is different each competition. It's based on like how hard the competition is. So if the competition is harder and then people score lower on average, they're gonna make the cutoff lower. But then if the competition is like super easy and then a lot of people do really well, they're gonna make the cutoff higher so that the same number of people get promoted each time. And something else cool about USACO is that you should definitely participate no matter whether you think like you have a chance at promotion or not, because you won't get demoted. So the worst case scenario, you just stay where you're at. But then if you participate, you also have a chance of being promoted. So that's also something that I wanted to mention. So what coding languages do you have to know for it? That's a good question. So you can use Python, Java, or C++. And when we talk about efficiency, we're going to talk about like which languages are better in a sense, but you can use either of those 3, I think. If you don't get promoted the first time, then are you out of the contest? No, you're not out of the contest. So you start off at bronze, and if you don't get promoted to silver, you're just still at bronze. So you can just try again in the next contest. You don't need to know all 3. You just need to know one of them. Just you use whichever language you're the most comfortable with. Yeah. Good question. Okay. So, is there another question? What stops people from using AI? Okay, so USACO has a very rigorous like system to detect if anyone's cheating. And if you are caught cheating, like if they have evidence that you are cheating with, like if they catch you cheating with their system, you will be like demoted back to bronze, or you could even get banned from USACO. So they have like their system. So definitely don't try to like cheat or use AI, because they will catch you and that won't be good. Yeah, good question. So now let's talk about efficiency. And this is a quote from one of our past captains: "Let's be lazy since less is more." I kind of like that. So about the programming language. It's generally agreed that C++ is the most time efficient language, and then Java is very similar to C++ in terms of like efficiency, and then Python is not the best language because it can take up more runtime. And although Python users do get a few extra seconds in their time limit, it usually doesn't account for the differences in efficiency. So Python is like the least recommended language out of the three to use in USACO. However, if you are just starting off, like especially in the bronze division, it won't really matter because you won't have to deal with stuff where efficiency is that big of an issue. So if you're just getting started with USACO, don't worry too much about like the language. Just choose any language that you're the most comfortable with. But as you get promoted and you're in those higher divisions, definitely consider switching to Java or C++. It would definitely help with the efficiency. And now on the subject of efficiency, we should talk about big O notation. So big O notation basically tells you like how many operations your program would have to execute. So for example, if you are doing a simple mathematic calculation, like if you're doing 2 times 3, that's O of 1 because you are just doing one calculation. And in fact, if you're just doing a mathematical calculation, no matter how complex the calculation is, it's just O of 1 because you're just doing that one single operation. And then O of n would be like if you have a list of n elements and you go through the list and do something with each element, then you are doing n operations. So that would be O of n. And then these are like, okay, O of 1 is obviously really good. O of n is fair. And then there starts getting pretty horrible when you go up here, especially like with O of n factorial. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar, factorial is basically, n factorial is just n times n minus 1 times n minus 2 all the way to times 1. So for example, 4 factorial would be 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And we start to see O of n factorial kind of time complexities once we start using brute force, and that would be like listing out every single possible arrangement and then determining which ones work or something like that, or like determining the best one by listing out every single possible possibility. That would be O of n factorial, which is you really don't want to use. But if you are like just starting off, like especially in the bronze division, sometimes they'll be more lenient with you in terms of like the time complexity, so you can get away with some of the bad or horrible time complexities. But again, as you start going up the divisions, you should really aim to keep your time complexity within the good to fair range, like excellent to fair range. And here are some like common time complexities. So if we just, again, if it's a mathematical formula that all you have to do is calculate and answer, do math with Python or like whatever language you use, that's O of 1. That's just one operation. And if you are like iterating through an array or list of n elements, that would be O of n because you are looking at every single element. And another thing I want to mention is that the time complexity, the big O notation, represents like kind of the worst case scenario, so the maximum number of operations you have to do. So for example, if you are going through a list and you want to find a certain element, you want to find which index it's on, then that would be O of n, even though like if you find it early on in the list, you won't have to necessarily look at all n elements. The worst case scenario would be that element appears at the very end of the list, in which you would have to look at all n elements. So that would still be O of n. So represents the worst case scenario. And then O of n factorial would be like iterating through every single permutation or every single possibility. And then if, for example, you want to determine the best way to do something, so you list out every single way to do it. That would be O of n factorial. So here are some values of n that you could use these different time complexities on. So if n is less than or equal to 10, generally, you can get away with some of these pretty horrible time complexities. So if n is like really small, it's okay to brute force it and list out every single possibility. So O of n factorial is generally okay. And then as n gets bigger and bigger, you really want to stick to some of the better time efficiencies. So like we see here, if n is like 10 to the 18th power, you're going to run forever if you do something like O of n factorial or even O of n. So you really want to stick to some of the better time complexities here. So are there any questions about Big O notation, efficiency, programming languages, time complexities? We're going to do a mini quiz in just a sec. So are there any questions? Let me check the chat. How does Big O notation help you? So it just kind of gives you an idea of like how much time your code is going to take up. So USACO does have like a time limit. So sometimes you want to like keep in mind how many operations your program would have to execute, and if it's like one of the higher time complexities. And then if you take a look at some of the USACO numbers, like we saw in the Cal College problem, that n was like less than or equal to 10 to the 5th. So if we refer back to this chart here, 10 to the 5th, we want to stick to some of these time complexities are okay. So given this number, we know that we can get away with these kinds of time complexities, but like not these ones up here. So since we know that n is less than or equal to 10 to the 5th, we want to stick to the ones after 10 to the 5th. So like all of these are okay, but you want to avoid the ones up here. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, good. What about log of log to the 2 to the 10 plus 6? Yeah, that is still O of 1 because that is still just a mathematical computation. So, yeah, good question. Oh, log is something that you will learn in high school. So if you don't know what log is, don't worry about it. It's basically like reverse exponentation, but yeah, you don't have to worry about it for now. You'll probably learn about it in like late middle school or high school. So yeah. So now let's do like a quick quiz. So what is time complexity? What do you guys think? Type your responses in the chat. So is it the amount of memory an algorithm consumes, the number of operation an algorithm performs, or the time it takes you to solve a problem? I'm seeing some mixed answers in the chat. Yeah, it would be 2. It's the number of operations that your algorithm performs. So like again, O of n means that your algorithm would have to perform n operations. So like if you're iterating through a list of n elements. So what time complexity would addition take if you are adding 2 numbers or adding however many numbers? Hint, think about mathematical calculations. What would mathematical calculations be? Let's see. Yeah, that's right. It would be O of 1 because it's just a single operation. So no matter how big a number is, or like if you're doing exponents, logs, whatever, it's just a single calculation. So that would just be O of 1. So what does big O notation express? Would it be the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, or the average scenario? Check the chat. Yeah, that's right. It would be 2, the worst case scenario. So yeah, again, you might not necessarily perform that many operations, but that is just the worst case scenario. So what is the most restrictive time complexity for a loop from 1 to n? So what would the big O notation be for the time complexity if you are looping through the range 1 to n? Think about the number of operations that you would be executing. Yeah, that would be O of n. That's right. So number 1 is correct. O of n. Because again, you are performing n operations. Are there any questions? Is everything like making sense? Feel free to raise your hand or like unmute yourself as well. So if that's faster. Okay, so doesn't seem like there are any questions. So in that case, let's move on. So we talked a little bit about O of n factorial before, and that's seen a lot with brute forces, or sometimes also called complete searches. So you basically just, you brute force the problem. You don't really care about being efficient. So like it would only work for smaller sizes because again, the time complexity is really bad. And if you are working with larger inputs and you're listing out like every single case possible, then it's going to take you a lot of time and you're definitely going to exceed the time limit. So an example of brute force would be like you are making groups of students and you want to see like if you are grouping however many students into groups of 5 and how many ways can you have groups of 5 so that like Alice and Bob are in the same group. So if you have like 4,000 students and you list out every single possibility of groups of 5 and then you count the ones where Alice and Bob are in the same group, you're gonna be sitting there for a while, right? But then if there are only like 5 students, then it would be really easy and brute forcing wouldn't be a problem. So again, brute force is only used on small input sizes and they can be extremely thorough. So that's like one benefit of brute forcing. But yeah, usually in USACO, you can only get away with brute forcing in some of the earlier divisions like bronze. And then afterwards, you really can't brute force anything because the numbers start getting so big. So are there any questions about brute forcing? Let me just check the chat. So what exactly is like brute forcing, are you asking? Yeah, so brute forcing, again, it's like listing out every single possible combination and then seeing which one is the best or which ones work or whatever. So there's not really like an algorithm. You just kind of, again, it's like exactly what the name sounds like. You just use brute force. So, or for another example would be like if I'm making a sandwich and there's like 3 different types of bread I could use, 4 different types of meat, 2 different types of cheese, like 6 different types of vegetables, and I want to see how many ways I can make a unique sandwich. So I can obviously do the math. That would be more efficient. That would just be O of 1. But I could also list out every single possible sandwich that I can make, and then that would be brute forcing. So, yeah. that is brute forcing. So yeah, also there is, also in USACO, another type of problem would be simulation, which is again very much what it sounds like. So you're just simulating what the problem is asking and you're not really like putting in your own algorithm. So for example, like if the problem is describing a game played between two players, and then the input describes like the moves that each player makes, and then they just want you to output the result of the game, you just have to simulate the game according to the game's rules. And then there's generally no like algorithm to do this. You just have to follow whatever you want to simulate. And then this is usually seen in bronze. So it's just to test your knowledge of your programming language and then some of its data structures, like lists, usually. Is there a question? Okay. Yeah, so are there any other lingering questions about this? About simulation, brute force? So why would you choose this over being efficient? Yeah, that's a good question. So obviously, if you can be efficient, you should be as efficient as possible. But sometimes there really is no good way, or at least like you can't think of a good way in that moment to be efficient. It's obviously harder to come up with an efficient solution than to brute force. So if you really can't come up with anything better, you can use brute force. And usually some of the test cases give you smaller numbers, but then the later test cases give you really big numbers. So your brute force solution might work on some of the earlier test cases, and that's still better than nothing because again, you can get partial points or you can get partial credit for that question. So brute force is something that you would use if you can't think of anything else. Yeah, good questions, guys. So now let's get some practice in. So let's tackle a simple problem together, or not simple, this is actually a very classic problem for a lot of interviews. So I don't know if you guys heard about LeetCode, but like a lot of interviewers use these. So this is a very famous problem. It's called the two-sum. So you are given a list of integers called nums and then a target. So you want to return the indices of the two numbers such that they add up to target. So assume that each input has only one solution, exactly one, and then you can't use the same element twice. And yeah, so you can return the two indexes in any order. So for example, if we have an input that looks something like this, so we have the list nums. We got 2, 7, 11, and 15, and our target is 9. So we want to find the two numbers that add up to 9 in this list. And we would output 0 and 1 because the number at index 0, which is 2, plus the number at index 1, which is 7, is equal to 9. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to brainstorm a solution, and also I should put the IDE here. I'll put the IDE link in the chat so you guys can access it. And yeah, so take a few minutes to work on this problem. And again, if you have your own IDE that you prefer, feel free to use that as well. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to tackle that. And once you have a solution, feel free to copy and paste it in the chat to share with us, and then we'll take a look at it. Let's see. see any activity in the chat. Yeah, this can be a little daunting at first, but my hint to you guys is to try to use a nested for loop. Try to use a nested for loop because you want to look at the possible pairings of elements in the list. So you want to look at two elements in the list at the same time. So yeah, my hint to you guys. We ask the user for the nums array. In this case, you won't have to do that. You can just use this example. You can just declare a list that's this one. Yeah. Or you can what I did was I defined a function. So I said define toSum, and then I had the nums and then the target be like parameters. So it would work for like any input, but you won't need to use like the actual user input thing. So this is how I started it. Oh, let's take a look at Elaine's. So inputs, target, I in range. Yeah, so Elaine, I like your solution. Let me just copy and paste that to the IDE. So you have for I in range of length of inputs. So seems like you have I iterate through all of the indexes. That's good. And then for J in range, also the also length inputs. So over here, I would actually change this a little bit because everything else is good except the fact that if the are you saying like do you have this break here? So like if you find this, we end the code. Like if we find a pair, yeah. So yeah, I like that, but we just need to make sure that break is within the if block as well. So that way, it would end the code only once it actually found the sum. But yeah, I like the break because that helps with time efficiency. So once you find the sum, you don't keep going looking for stuff. So the only problem with having J range through all of inputs is that they said that you cannot use the same element twice. So if we have the target, for example, be like 14, then we have 7 here. So it would actually return 7. It would be 7 2 times because I would be 1, and then so inputs of I would be 7, and then J would iterate through all the indexes, and then J would be 1 as well. And then Python looks at the two numbers. It looks at 7 and 7, and they sum up to 14, and then it would return 7 2 times, but we cannot use a number twice. So that's the only that's the only problem with having J also have the same range as I. So a quick fix to this. So yeah, as you can see here, it would return 1 and 1 because index 1 has 7, and then 7 plus 7 is 14. So a quick fix that I would do is in an if statement, you can actually have and. So it would have both conditions have to be true. So I would add I does not equal J. So the exclamation equals sign means doesn't equal. So that way, we make sure that we aren't just using the same number twice. Does that make sense? Yeah, but other than that, your code looks good. So yeah, does anyone else want to share their solutions? If we don't have any other solutions, let's look at the one that I came up with. So, oops, I'll just close this up. So this is the solution that I came up with. So I defined a function, which you didn't have to do, but that's just what I did. So we have nums and target. Nums is our list, and target is the value that we want to sum up to. So I did for I in range length of nums minus 1. So I actually looked at every single number except for the last one. And then my j range would actually be I plus 1 all the way up to the length of nums. So that way, and then I did the same thing. If nums of I plus nums of j is equal to target, I return a list with I and j in it. So what I'm essentially doing here, so if I have this list right here, and for example, if I'm looking for the sum 18, so I takes on the indexes of 2, 7, and 11. So I would look, and then when I is 0, so meaning nums of I is 2, j would range through all of these values, and I would check if 2 plus 7 is equal to 18, if 2 plus 11 is equal to 18, and if 2 plus 15 is equal to 18. And then since none of those are equal to 18, I would move on to 1. So nums of I would be 7 because 7 is index 1. And then j would range through these values. So I would check 7 plus 11 and then 7 plus 15. But 7 plus 11, we already find the 18. So because 7 plus 11 gets us 18. So we return 7 and 11. Are there questions about this solution? Does everything make sense about this? Anything like to clarify? Feel free to just raise your hand, unmute yourself, or ask your question in the chat. Okay, so doesn't seem like there are any questions regarding this solution. So if that's the case, let me just quickly talk about code forces. So Code Forces is also like a site that you can practice problems on, kind of like HackerRank, or if you guys are more familiar with that. So it has a lot of USACO styled problems. So you can use it to kind of practice for USACO basically. And then this is a link to the Code Forces site. It's linked up here in the slides. So after this is over, you guys can come back to these slides, which are again posted in the Google Doc, and then use this link to go to Code Forces, and you can actually register for like a Code Forces account, but I mean, you don't have to, but you can if you want to. And Code Forces has a lot of problems that you can attempt. So for example, we have this problem, thorns and coins. So this is just another way to get some good practice in. And yeah, so Codeforces is a pretty good resource if you want to practice for USACO. And yeah, it's very similar, like input, output examples as USACO gives you, and they also have like problem statements and then the issue that they want you to solve, so very similar to USACO. And now let's talk about some resources that you guys can use to practice for USACO. So the first one that I want to talk about is this USACO guide, which is an amazing website. And you have all of these lessons available to you. Yeah, so you can create an account with USACO guide. And here's some like stats about their users. So obviously it's a pretty big thing. And then they have classes, you can sign up, or some of them are like online, so you could literally just go in and then do lessons whenever you feel like it. They also have an IDE as well. So you can choose C++, Java, or Python. So it's very similar to the online Python IDE, but personally, I like to use this one better because you can also customize your inputs. So that's something that you can use. And then there's also a lot of other cool resources that they have that you can check out. They got like groups, clubs, they have their own contests and workshops as well. So if you are interested in this, feel free to check this out after this meeting today. Again, everything's linked in the slides. Then we also have our own Neuqua Valley Computing Team website. We have, again, these are the meeting dates, Thursdays after school in D200 for those of you guys who will be attending Neuqua in the fall. Feel free to join us, highly encourage it. We got a lot of resources for USACO and ACSL, which ACSL you guys will learn a little bit more about next week. So this is our USACO page, and then here's like a full list of all the languages that you can use. So for those of you guys who are curious, there's like Java, C++, C, Python 2, Python 3. And then, yeah, these are all of the languages. They have very detailed information about the grading system, so all the point system that I talked about. So if you want to, if there's anything that you want to clarify, you can read this page. And then again, about the divisions or the 4 levels. And then there's very detailed information about each division here. And as well as the input output, how to optimize, as well as some commonly used algorithms, and then some C++ propaganda. And yeah, they have the USACO website linked as well. So this is NVComputing, our own website. And then there's also LeetCode, which is where we got the two-sum problem from. So LeetCode, again, a lot of interviewers use it for their interviews. And then all these problems are very like algorithmic based. So you could definitely explore LeetCode a little bit. And yeah, to get some good practice in, you can use LeetCode. And this is our homework, which is a Codeforces problem actually. So it is called maximum distance, and you're given n points, n coordinate points, so an x value and a y value, and then you want to find the maximum distance between any of the 2 points. So the first line has n, so the second line has the coordinates, the x coordinates, and then the third line has the y coordinates. So for example, there's 3 coordinates here. The first one is 321, 404. The second one is -15, 373, and then the third one is -525, 990. And then you will use the distance formula, which is given right here. So this could be helpful. The distance between 2 points given their coordinates. And then you want to output the maximum distance between any of the 2 points. So yeah, give this your best effort, and then you can submit with the Google form, which is also linked in the Google Doc. And you can also submit it in the Codeforce's website if you make an account. So that would be fun to do if that's something that interests you. Where is the Google Doc? Oh, so the Google Doc, I believe, should have been emailed to everybody. If not, I can post it in the chat as well. So this is the link to the Google Doc. I pinned it. So yeah. So for those of you guys who for some reason don't have access to it, this is where you can find our homework as well as the slides and recorded videos of each meeting. So yeah. So try out maximum distance. Yeah. So oops, before we finish up, are there any questions about anything we talked about today? What if you need help with the homework? So yeah, that's a good question. So if there is something specific about the homework that you need help with, you can obviously consult like a friend who might have a little bit more experience in computing. You can consult a parent, or you can consult some of these websites like W3 Schools, which you can go over here to the Python tutorial. So for example, if you don't know how to make a list, or if you don't know how to use a for loop, or if you want to use a dictionary but you're not sure how that works, you can go over here and then check out a lot of the information that they have. And if you have like a specific question, you can go to sites like Stack Overflow and ask it, or see if someone else has already asked a similar question in the past. So Stack Overflow is also a really good resource to use. And I believe we also have resources linked in one of the 2 slides from either yesterday or the day before that. So you guys can head over to those slides and check out the resources we have linked there if you need help with the homework. So yeah, good question. Good question. Yeah, so that's all we have time for today. And yeah, thank you guys for being here with us. I highly enjoyed working with you guys. And so tomorrow, Kundan will be talking about some web development, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, see you guys tomorrow. Bye, everyone.